you go to school? And who's your dad?
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason morons.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of camera!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink eye? Is this what pink eye is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
Please go outside and look at the moon quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
But I ain't spending any time on it.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Conditional Release program. It's Jack the Insider here, Peter Hoisted, and we're continuing along a bit of a theme of one-on-one interviews. And joining me is true crime reporter Emily Webb. G'day, Emily. How are you?
I'm great, Jack / Peter. Pleased to be here.
You can call me Jack. My wife does. Everyone does, really. It's only the tax office that refers to me as Peter. Look, let's start. Look, first saying you've got a new book out. It's your second book or third?
I've written in total 5 books, but 3 went out of print, and publisher goes bust. I got my rights back, but this is the second one with my current publisher, Big Sky Publishing, and it's some stuff that I'd done years ago and I've updated. But yeah, it's called Murder in the Suburbs, More True Crime Cases You'll Never Forget. A follow-up to Suburban True Crime. There's a bit of a theme there.
Suburban True Crime, which I read 2 years ago, and that's the sort of study of this kind of banality of evil, isn't it? This people in sort of all walks of life who become murderous.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating because, most of us live in, the suburbs, cities. I mean, obviously many people do live in regional areas, but I just find it so intriguing what happens like behind the white picket fence, so to speak. I mean, I do have a picket fence. It's weird, but, just what happens and why. And I've just always been fascinated with true crime since I was probably way too young to be interested in it.
Well, yeah. When did your fascination with true crime start?
I was about 10.
Yeah.
And I was on holiday in New Zealand. My dad's from New Zealand, from a really big family, and he met my mum over, and she's from Melbourne and moved here, and we'd go for holidays, and I was staying at my grandparents' house, and one of my uncles had some books in storage there. And I loved reading. Like, I was a big reader as a kid, and still now, though my attention span isn't so great for it. But there was this book called Infamous Murders, and it was one of those big hardcovers, and it had all these old crimes like John Reginald Christie and Lizzie Borden and the acid bath murderer. I think his name was Hay.
Yes. And
I was just like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And I also used to like reading magazines, and, I grew up, I'm a late 1970s baby, and, I grew up remembering like Lindy Chamberlain, that case, and reading, like The New Idea and Woman's Day and seeing stuff on TV. And I remember hearing my parents having a dinner party, and people used to like fight over whether they thought Lindy Chamberlain was guilty or innocent. I can remember that growing up. And so, I just was always intrigued by true stories.
Yes. Look, my association with true crime, I can trace it back to one of my earliest memories. And that is my parents grew up in Reservoir. My parents were out in the back veranda, and they were talking. You could tell they were troubled and worried. So this would have been Christmas Eve or around Christmas in 1966, and they were discussing the escape of Ronald Ryan and Peter Walker, because Melbourne was kind of, at the time, after these two guys escaped, and it obviously led to Ryan being convicted of the murder of a prison guard, Hodgson, I think, from memory. But while they were on the run, there'd been a bank robbery as well. So there was this massive concern in the community that these two very wild guys were out. Now, as it turned out, both of them were kind of were so not reckless, horrible people. They'd escaped from a terrible place. Ryan wanted to be back with his wife. His wife had indicated that she was going to divorce him, and that's why they left. But Melbourne was struck with fear, and I was thinking, as a kid, 4 years of age, I was thinking, oh, this is going to bugger up Christmas. This is, will I still get presents? And that's my memory of it. And I found out a lot more about the Ryan and Walker thing since. But my father he was a teacher, he would often talk about painters and dockers, and because that's the other thing about growing up in Melbourne. Every time there was an election of office bearers of the painters and dockers, there were just people getting shot dead all over the place.
Yeah, there was a bit of a body count.
Yeah. So these are the things that sort of got me into it.
Yeah, I was speaking to my dad. I see him. We live close by. We were watching my older daughter play footy, and my dad's a jeweler, and so in the 1970s, I just read John Sylvester's book, Dark City, and he wrote about the Manchester Unity.
Manchester Unity. I remember that. It was a Friday night, and the city was basically shut down. I remember just looking at
1970. There was 1978, but my dad was working in the building that day because he worked at the time for Rumbold and Coverdale. And he worked for years in his own business. So I know that building. I grew up in that building, basically running up and down stairs, taking jobs to, Vic the Plater from Armenia. That's how I learnt about the Armenian terrible earthquakes that happened, because Vic the Plater was from Armenia, and then there was the diamond setters. But I said to Dad, do you remember what it was like? And my dad's kind of pretty like, oh, yeah, vaguely kind of thing. But that's terrifying. I mean, I was only a baby then, but it's like I don't know if he was on the 6th floor and the killings were on the 9th floor or reversing,
Wow.
But I was like, oh my God.
They were my memory of it is that they were made to lie down, face down, and then executed.
Yeah, it was brutal. And then there was another murders in the Century building, which is a couple of doors down. That was in the 90s. But most jewellery stuff back then, and there's not as much now. My brother's a jeweller too, but got a shop and they work from that. But yeah, it was all concentrated in those buildings. So, yeah.
I just don't quite recalling whether those murders were ever solved. My view is that they weren't. They remain unsolved.
Was Alex Marcus, I think.
Sack Marcus was considered to be the offender, but I don't know that he was ever charged. He was actually convicted of the murder of a fellow who sort of basically washed up on Point Lonsdale. And that was the murder he was convicted of. I think it was a crossbow murder from memory.
Oh, God.
Sack Marcus, of course, went to jail, went to Pentridge. I think he became I know he became one of the first prisoners to go into JICA, which was the prison within the prison, Alex Sack Marcus, and he was really despised by a lot of his fellow inmates. He had killed a man with a long criminal history by the name of Barry Michael Quinn.
Yeah, I've heard a bit about this, but I'm not across. I know a bit of the old Pentridge law, but not a lot of it.
Quinn comes from a family of armed robbers, and he was doing time, I presume, for armed robbery. And while Sack Marcus and he were in the workshop, Sack Marcus sprayed him with solvent, highly flammable solvent, and set fire to him. So Quinn died that way, and within a couple of years, Sack Marcus was beaten to death by a group of people, but the murder was pinned on Tiny Minogue, one of the Russell Street bombers. I remember Sack Marcus being carted out of Pentridge. He was beaten severely with weights in pillowcases and stabbed multiple times. I just remember his body being taken away, and his face was visible, his head was visible, and there were really sort of like no recognizable facial features. He'd been beaten that severely.
It's pretty brutal. Was he part of the fire? There was a fire.
No, he was out by that stage. Well, he was dead by that stage.
Oh, he was dead by that stage.
Dead
He
by
was
that
out.
stage.
He was out for sure.
never coming out. There was an homicide inspector, Delanus, who always maintained they had Sack Marcus down for about 12 murders, but he was only ever convicted of one. When Minogue was charged with the murder, of course, he was serving a very long prison sentence, which continues to this day for his role in the Russell Street bombings. Sack Marcus was considered so appalling that the judge added simply just, I think, 3 days to Sack Marcus's to Minogue's sentence. It was considered that Sack Marcus is so appalling that his death was only worth an extra 3 days.
Wow.
So there's that little story there. Tell me about your writing process. Well, tell me about your research processes too. How you find these. We'll get to some individual cases shortly, but how you find these cases, how you research them, and then how you go about in the writing process. But we'll start with the research.
Well, the research is my favourite part. I love, going into newspaper archives. I love Trove. Trove is like the greatest thing ever.
It is just a wonderful thing.
It's the best.
God bless Gideon Hay. He sort of led the charge to continue the funding because during, I think, the Morrison government days, they were going to basically cut the funding to the point where Trove may not have had much impact on our lives at all, but it is just a wonderful resource.
It's the best. And I think when I discovered that, I was like, oh my God. And I subscribed to like newspapers.com because, it's handy. But I used to, back in the day, well, I haven't done it for a while. I love doing it. Going to the State Library and going through the old microfiche. And I always have to get taught how to do it. But the Public Records Office as well is amazing in North Melbourne. And so what I do is I just I Google, I get on Trove and I put some search terms in and I just love newspapers. I mean, I was a local news reporter, probably my most favouriteest job ever. Like I, worked at News Corp on the local newspapers in Melbourne, and as a very young journo, I worked at Pacific. I did my cadetship there. So fun. But you never appreciate that stuff when you're young. And then I went to London and met my husband and lived in London for a long time. But I just read and I research and, I go down rabbit holes and, I've got a pretty good true crime knowledge because I've read a lot of true crime. I've just read a lot of true crime books and, with podcasting as well, podcasts I love listening, but I just look at stuff. I particularly like things that predate, I guess, the internet. I often look up crimes around the area I live in and, I just read Osley case judgments, from different years. Things that pique my interest, I guess, are things that, if I don't know much about them and I want to know more, I think that's always a good place to start when you're writing. Because I think, if I don't know about this, I think other people will want to know as well. And that's probably my jam, I guess. But I will research, but the writing is the tricky part for me.
When you go to the State Library, and I do this up in Sydney, and you got the microfiche, and it might be the Daily Mirror or, older newspapers now gone, the Sun, those sorts of things. I found myself, I'd be looking for specifics, and really it is sort of needle in a haystack often. So you're looking around for reporting. Incidents occurred on certain dates, so you're looking for reporting. And then you'll see something like, there was a fire in there, and you'll get distracted and you'll be sort of looking at what happens about the fire and perhaps other things. There might even be sporting things, and you go, I better go and see the next edition to see what's going on there. So.
Or court briefs, like in the Canberra Times. Like I always search the court briefs because I'm like, I want to know more. But also a great thing is you've got to give a bit of time. But, a few of the cases I've written about that were local to me, I needed to access old, the old leader newspapers or whatever they were called at the time. Like my local's the Knox Leader, but it was once the Knox Sherbrooke Gazette. So you contact the State Library and they're all sort of bound up in, years and months, and you get them, they're in storage like in Bendigo or Ballarat or something, and they bring them to you and you go and, your order's ready and you sit there. And I'm in heaven when I'm doing that. Like it's my most favourite thing.
It's a wonderful, wonderful resource, our State Library, just astonishingly good places. The New South Wales has 2 sections. So one's sort of a mainly public thing in terms of the collections, and the other things are the other part of it, which it's known as the Mitchell Library, is where the rare things are kept, which is you can look but don't touch, and certainly not take away. Wonderful resources. But how do you come around once you've done your research? You've got the block of stuff there. You might seek to contact witnesses.
Yeah, I try. Yeah, I try, or retired police associations are great to contact. I've had a bit of luck with those. And interestingly, I have to give them a shout out. The Naval Research, I think it's association. Anyway, I had this particular question about a ship. Like, I was writing about someone who'd been in the Navy, and I want to get it right. Look, mistakes can happen, but I emailed them, and literally this amazing guy came back to me within 24 hours with just the answer. If it's something a bit more complicated, you might need to pay or something, which is fine. But I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like, there are so many great people, and they research because they love the history. And I was like, God bless these people. Yeah,
archivists. I had a number of successes in writing myself, just with contacting an archivist, particularly around the Ballarat Diocese for Unholy Trinity. I just had this wonderful guy who came forward and said, because John Day, who was this terrible pedophile offender, and everyone within the diocese, who, with senior priests and bishops and so forth, they basically removed all his photographs. Most of his photographs were just trashed, gone. So we had just two, and then I got hold of the archivist at the diocese there, who was a wonderful supplier of documents and some images. That was how bad this is. We're going back to the late 1970s. They decided, well, we're not going to keep too many images of John Day, and so there's only 3 or 4, and it's an interesting thing. They've gone into basically, destroy their own history in many ways. But yeah, so you've got it all together, and then you sit down in front of your laptop, and you've got a blank page in front of you. Do you get anxious about that process?
I do. My publisher does too. I'll let you know.
Deadlines.
How's the book going? Yeah, it's going great. What's the word count? I'll bump it up by 20,000 words when it's it's going really. Look, I have no plan. I have no plan. I just write, but I need a dangerously close deadline to actually be productive.
I think we all do. I think we all do. I mean, it'd be nice to be able to, hand a manuscript over. Well, these days it's all digital, but you hand a manuscript over and you still got 3 months to go. But it's never happened in my life. It's never happened in my experience anyway. So you really are just still smashing out words on the day before. Smashing
it out. I mean, I think that's why I liked journalism. I like a deadline. If I've got like too long to do something, and it could be, I was diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years ago. That's probably something to do with it. But with writing, I actually find writing really hard. And I get to a point where I'm like, I can't do it. I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm doing nothing. Once I get into it, I'm like, I really like this. This is fun.
There is that sense. Yeah. But it is an anxious process. Writers, and it is, it's an intensely private thing too, or personal thing, in that it's not something you can share with other people. You can't really say, look, I was wondering if you can give me a hand because I don't know how to approach this. And it's something you have to resolve yourself. You have to do all the problem solving. With me looking at the blank page, I just smash it. So, and what I mean by that is that's not some sort of triumphalism. You just write. And while you're writing that, a lot of this is garbage, right? But just keep going, and you can redraft, you can change, you can amend, you can tighten up, all that sort of stuff. Who are your favourite crime writers? Not true crime writers. Who are your favourite crime writers?
Well, I do read crime fiction, but not as
I don't read much of it.
Yeah, like I go through phases, but I really loved, she's passed away now, which is sad, but there was a British author called Mo Hayder, and her first book, The Birdman, I read when I was living in London, and it was really gritty, like really her main protagonist was, you know, just really messed up. I mean, it's a trope, but it's a great trope. But it was so, like, I like very dark crime fiction. Like, I'm not a cozy crime person. I mean, yeah, I've watched Midsummer Murders and that, but that's not my vibe. I like very dark stuff. And it was just blew me away. So I love Mo Hayder's work. But one of my absolutely favourite books is Heartburn by Nora Ephron.
Yes.
Which is,
I haven't read it.
Yeah, it got turned into a film with Meryl Streep and I'm having a blank now, Jack Nicholson.
Right.
And she's basically writing, it's a fictionalized account of the breakdown of her marriage to Carl Bernstein, I think.
Right.
Carl Bernstein.
Yes.
And it's only a thin, like it's almost like a novella length, but it's just, Nora Ephron had a great writing style, like very snappy. But yeah, and I loved the book, The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole. When I was growing up, I loved that
I read
book.
that. So I used to work, my first job out of uni was to work in a bookshop. And then I went on to run bookshops. I worked in publishing, and then I ran a medical bookshop, which is slightly different thing. But we did have a small sort of general reader area. One of my favourite writers is James Ellroy. I don't know if you've read much of Ellroy's stuff.
I haven't read much. My dad really likes James Ellroy, yeah.
He has this staccato kind of writing style, 2-word sentences, punch, 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 you know, and there's a lot to be said about that style. Some people, I think some people, when you talk to them about Ellroy, they'll be actually bothered by that style. I actually find it really a great approach, you know.
Justin Smith, who he's on radio, but he writes opinion piece for the Herald Sun, but he's gone into writing fiction, and he's got a really lovely way of writing. He says so much in very succinctly. It's very economical. I think there's a real craft to that. Like it's easy to write, blah, 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 you know. But I think because I actually find it hard to write at length, because when I was a newspaper reporter, like at Leader, you know, the maximum you'd write is 400 words. And that was like a feature, and you just got to smash it out. You're writing for 4 or 5 stories a day. You're just smashing it out. And so my writing's quite clean, but sometimes you think, well, it's kind of hard sometimes with true crime to zhuzh it up. Like you can be a bit creative, but yeah, it's very factual, I guess, because it has to be.
What you say is absolutely right, and it's a really important skill for any writer to learn. I moved into, you know, sort of professional writing through lads mags, you know, through tits and bum mags. And when I first,
there's some good writing in those.
When I first started there, see, I could knock out 1,000 words quite easily, but these mags require 200 or 300, and I had to learn that skill. And everyone around me had that skill. I just sort of felt a bit bereft for a while, but it actually, you know, often joke this, you know, The Economist, the online magazine in print as well. The Economist has this approach of give me 10,000 words when 1,000 would do. But the flip side of that is, you know, your experience in local newspapers and mine in lads mags that said, you've got to get this story across in 300 words. That's a real art form in many ways to get that message across when you could easily blab out about 1,000 words. So yeah, that's a real skill, and that sort of ties into that sort of James Ellroy sort of way of writing. Where, you know, 2-word sentences, just spin them out. Then there might be a longer sentence. Then it's a good way. The first thing to do with people, for anyone who wants to write or is writing, is just hit the page with words, fill the page with words, and you can always go back there and redraft. You can't redraft something that's not there.
That's true. Get it written, don't get it right was a tip. Well, obviously you've got to get it right when you're on a newspaper, but someone said just get it written, don't get it right. Like I would often write my intro last, but sometimes I needed to get the intro right to then get the story going. It just depends on the mood, but I am a terrible procrastinator. Like I will think about it. I'm like in my head, I'm writing it. Oh, I'll just research a bit more. It's like, Emily, get it written. And look, the process of writing this last book, look, it was pretty stressful. You know, I had a daughter doing year 12. You know, life gets in the way. I work.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
I've got to cook dinner.
You can't just sit in a room with a door locked.
No,
and expect life to just pass you by. You know, we have other things to do.
Yeah, I don't have a wife to sort of do all my stuff. I'm not a male writer of the 1950s, you know, like just in my little thing.
Indeed, many women writers would have to adopt male personas to get published.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know what it is about writing because I don't love writing, but maybe I do. I can't work it out. I think I'm pretty good at it. I'm not amazing, but I love pulling bits of information together, and the kind of work I do as a day job. I work in comms now and advocacy stuff. And, you know, I think being a journalist and, you know, writing, it gives you the skill of pulling out information. You've got to read reports. You've got to, you know, oh yeah, I know where to go for this. That is my Spidey skill, I guess. I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not an expert in anything. I just kind of roll along. I'm like, I don't know how these things happen. I just follow my interests and yeah.
And just having that ability to tie it all together, all your research, all the facts, all the data that you have, and you know, you're sort of planning it as you go. In your mind, when you're going to introduce this, that, and the other. And then hopefully by the end of that chapter, by the end of that 10,000 words, and I often think of things in a sort of block of chapters around that. So 10,000 words per chapter. Chapters don't have to be 10,000 words, of course, because that's part of the writer's deal. You can create around that, you know, but if you look at it from that point of view, what you're trying to do is plan so you can put all the elements of the story as they sort of develop, how you think they should develop into that bit. So by the time you get to that final sentence of that chapter, it's all in a neat little bow, hopefully.
That's right. And it does take a bit of work with that. And, you know, I do things like I'll be like, I'll dump a bit of info. So if you looked at my work in progress, absolute hot mess, like bloody notes here, highlights, you know, follow this up. And then I'll go off on a tangent where I'm like, oh, I've just discovered this, but you make it work. So you're writing about one thing, but then I like to be able to bring in maybe another crime or another thing of significance if it's related. And it takes a while to make that not be jarring, like on the page, but I feel like I just think I'm always improving. Like I read back, the first book I wrote was in 2011, Murder in Suburbia. I mean, I feel like I was much better at writing back then. My kids were really little. They slept. Maybe I was just more nervous, but I'm like, God, I think I did a much better job than I did now. But, you know, I read back on stuff and I was updating. I'm like, oh my God, Emily, that's terrible. What the hell? You know, that is shit.
Yeah. My first book was a book called Shallow Graves. And
I love that book. I've told you that before.
It really was, you know, I wrote it with Paul Kidd, and Paul has now left us, but he was a difficult man to work with, to say the least. And I'll go back and look at that now, and it's really just kind of very flat. On 22nd of January, 1968, this happened. And, you know, there's sort of a bit of artlessness there. But anyway, and you'd like to think that you can add a bit more colour, that you've developed some skill over the time. If we were good journalists, Emily, we've buried the lead. This is the problem we've got. We need to talk about Erin Patterson and the Leongatha murders.
Yeah.
When you first heard the story, and it was sort of 2 years ago, it was broken by the Australian's John Ferguson. Did you think it would be as big as it has become?
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's big.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised at all. Yeah, I just thought, this is out of the box. This is going to be huge.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see it unfold. Like I say, Ferg dropped a story into the Oz. It ran almost a week to the minute after the lunch. there'd been no coverage of it. I imagine the police, when they got a call from Ferg saying, we've heard there's been a mass poisoning event in Leongatha, that the police would have gone, oh no, it's out. Because they'd actually started a murder investigation without anybody really knowing. They'd formally started the investigation on the Friday, a week after almost a week after the lunch on the Saturday. So I think it was July 31, the lunch, and then I think it was about 5th of August by the time a formal murder investigation was launched. Is the fascination driven by the fact that the culprit was a woman, and that this obviously statistically is most unusual?
Look, I think when a woman is an alleged perpetrator, well, now Erin is convicted, so she is a murderer.
Yeah, she is.
I think there's always more of an element of fascination because, most murderers are men, but
absolutely.
also a lot of the victims are men too. You know, the stats will, I'd have to back my stats up, but, what I'm saying is that men usually perpetrate violence, and we, see a lot of that with the horrible stats around family violence. Most people are known to each other, victim, perpetrator. But I also think the poisoning element, that is unusual. I can remember times as a reporter where you'd get the, little pop-ups from, I don't know, the health department. It's like, be careful about picking mushrooms. And I worked at a council in Melbourne. In fact, the same council that Erin Patterson and her husband Simon once worked at. I did not work with them, but, there was a couple of incidents of people foraging but not having the knowledge and getting very sick.
Yes.
But very okay. This was, not often. And, that they put out a warning, don't let your dog sniff in around this. Don't pick mushrooms unless you know what they are. So I think the element of, yes, a woman, but also the manner of the murder weapon, so to speak. I hope that's okay to say that.
No, that's fine. Poisoning, it is said, it's a cliche, but poisoning is a woman's crime. But it has horrific consequences. I mean, the three murder victims and the survivors, so Gail Patterson, Heather Wilkinson, and Don Patterson all died, and Ian Wilkinson remained hospitalised for 7 or 8 weeks, but survived the attempt on his life. It's a really horrific, incredibly violent way to die. I mean, we're talking about live organ collapses, liver first, and then everything else around it. Incredibly pain, extraordinary pain, apparently. And so these 3 people would have been heavily sedated just to get them through these pain episodes. And 3 of them obviously died. 1 survived. The husband was supposed to be there too, so the body count might have got a bit higher.
Yeah, it's nasty when I found it very chilling, actually, the whole thing. I listened along a bit. I had a link to listen to the audio. I didn't listen every day because, I can't. I'm working. I'm doing online meetings. I would, in my ideal world, I'd love to, just go to court every day, and I loved court reporting. I didn't do as much of it as I liked, but it's incredible. But
yes,
I just found it very, the details of life, the way, if something like this happens, you go along in life and you just do your thing, and and then suddenly a spotlight's on everything, every action you do. And I just kept thinking, what struck me was, I just thought, these people just rocked up for a lunch. Oh, how lovely. We're going to Erin's for lunch. That's nice.
Probably would have had, from what we understand, they probably would have had some suspicions around the lunch. Why were they going there? Especially as their son had pulled out at the last minute. And this comes to Patterson's fantasy about being diagnosed with cancer. That gave her the means to justify the gathering.
Mm. And I think because, the people, the Pattersons and the Wilkinsons are very people of faith. They're very involved in their church community. Mm. Ian, who is a survivor, is a pastor, pastor at the church. I think that's the right word.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't remember the denomination, but, I over my life knowing people who involved in church, are Christian. I mean, I got brought up Catholic, I went to Catholic school, my kids go to a Catholic school. There is a sense of community, but, as people who do belong to a church and there's a church community, they're just usually really nice, community-minded, trusting people. That's just my view.
Yes.
And especially when it's in a small community. And I just thought, and I think there was a reference in, one of the women's diaries about, going to Erin's for lunch, and apparently they were quite looking forward to it,
Wow.
Who doesn't love a lunch? But it just sort of made me think, I thought, God, you're going off. It's like this seemingly very innocuous event. We all go out to lunch and would have appeared to be, that's lovely. We've been invited, and you bloody die. Like, yeah. It chilled me, actually. I can't explain why I felt that way.
It's a chilling crime because this is not some spontaneous event, some violent eruption. So this is a highly planned, calculated, organised, prearranged, probably thought about for months, if not weeks, fantasised for probably even longer. Attempted mass murder. It ticks the box on mass murder, by the way. A mass murder, by definition, is more than 2 people killed. So she is a mass murderer. I think that a lot of the fascination is down to the fact, the nature of the crime, obviously, the poisoning, the sheer evil of it, and also the fact that this has happened, this is perpetrated by a woman. The stats, and I've only got the 2023 stats on homicide, is that basically there were 409 homicides in Australia in that time. Males make up for almost 80% of the perpetrators. The victims are 65% male, so a lot of the offending is male against male. And then there is a long raft of very unfortunate domestic violence offences. 56% of homicides occur in the family home, and nearly 2 in 5, that's 38% of homicide and related offences, were family and domestic violence. And so 157 victims, almost all of them women, suffered murder at the hands of their partners or male figure in the home. So these are staggering things. And then we get to 2023. Actually, those murder stats of 409 will also include the 3 murders that Patterson committed. And even with that, I mean, it hasn't skewed the statistics. We are still looking at males mostly being the offenders. And males, more often than not, the majority of victims are male. But then we have this awful business of domestic violence murders, and other related violence which traumatises victims too. But yeah, I suspect that the unusual nature of this crime and the perpetrator is the reason why it's fascinating. Not just us. I mean, within 2 days of the story breaking, it had gone global. It was reported on the BBC, Washington Post, New York Times, around the world. So this fascinated a whole lot of people. Yeah.
And, just the intrigue about, well, for me, the police investigation, I always find that incredibly interesting. I like to read about what happens. And, and we heard the evidence about things. I find court fascinating. I find how the barristers question, like the semantics of it all. There's a lot of stuff. But obviously I get asked a lot if I do events or, in interviews and that, why are women so interested in true crime? And
yeah, that's a really interesting thing too.
It's like, I think, a big reason I think is sometimes, well, a lot of the time, I don't know, you grow up as a woman, as a young woman, as a girl, and you're told things like, don't walk out at night, do this, do that, be careful. And there's just an inherent safety messaging all the time. And I do wonder if a lot of women are interested because you read about, well, what do I need to do? How do I keep myself safe? But I do think a curiosity about the why, like why, what is going on? Why has this crime been perpetrated? And I know motive was not part of the case. Like, the jury did not have to
No
work out the motive,
evidence in motivation was put there. Yeah, motive.
I learned a lot actually. I think it's really interesting. You know how like podcasts are covering trials. I think one of the ones I first listened to was the Daily Mail do the trial podcast, and they covered the Lucy Letby case and also then the inquiry. Found that fascinating, and I think it's actually a good public service when it's done really well within the rules, because you just learn a lot. I think court reporting is incredibly important.
Absolutely. And some are very, very good at it. I did hear some psychology, and perhaps it's the street corner variety, that women are drawn to true crime books and other material because whether they have a son or not, they have this view that will the flesh of my loins become a serial killer, become a psychopath. I'm not sure whether that stands up or not, but what I do know is, as a former bookseller, the true crime section of your bookshop is where most of the books get knocked off. It's true crime.
I believe it.
True crime in progress. I think it was Chopper Reed's first book was the most stolen book in Australian publishing history, which is pretty funny.
Well, I used to always, when I go to the library, I love libraries. Like when I was little, my mum and dad had to take me to the library like twice. I was like such a voracious reader, like twice a week. I don't mean twice in my life, but I love the library, and I was just always lurking around that true crime section. I think it's 364 in the Dewey Decimal System or whatever, but that was there I am.
There you go. So, look, we're probably the same. I mean, a little bit the same anyway, We had parents who say, let's go to the library, and we would go to the library, in our case, every week. You.
Oh, yeah.
And on another visit every week. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, this is how we learnt to read, and this is how we learnt to develop our interests. You do talk in your new book, Murder in the Suburbs. You talk about a poisoning crime there too.
Yeah, well, it's horrendous, like poisoning. It's also quirky, like the quirkier crimes. And I found a case from 1984 actually, and it started in Sydney, and it was about an attempted murder by poisoning chocolates with arsenic, strychnine. Well, there's various ways to do it, and it was really fascinating because when you look through newspaper archives, it's actually that kind of stuff happened more than you think it would. Like people tried to kill people by poisoning, chocolates a lot. But this case was really fascinating. What happened was a box of chocolates was sent from Sydney to Cologne in Germany, and was sent to a jeweler, a jewelry store, and it actually wasn't intended for that. It wasn't intended for that person. But they opened it up, oh, this is nice, and hadn't read the note, and started to eat it and was violently ill. And when you spoke before about the manner of death of the poor people at the mushroom lunch, it's a violent death. So if someone is poisoned with strychnine or arsenic, it's like tetanus. Like they cannot control their body movements. Like there's arching back. It's like a horrendous way to die.
Incredibly violent.
But yeah, so this person got really sick really quickly, spat out the chocolate, and was in hospital, pretty sick, and was like, no one eat anything. And yeah, it was really unusual. And so this came to the attention of a police inspector in Cologne, and there was a note with this box of chocolates, and it was actually, so someone had sent it to their old friends. So the person who ate it, the jeweler, he was from Czechoslovakia, as it was known then.
Yeah, Czech
but had
Republic,
moved to Germany, and a friend from school in Czechoslovakia who lived in Sydney had sent the chocolates with instructions, and a $50 note. It's like, could you please send these on to a Mrs. Marianne Scher in a town further on, and here's $50 for your trouble. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And so it was about, well, why would someone, they tested it, the chocolates were poisoned. Why does someone want to murder like a widow in this little town in Germany? And it got tentacles, and 2 New South Wales detectives got involved. And it was this, like, what's the motive? What's happening? And it was tracked back to a man in Sydney called Milan Nakuda. It took quite a few years to get this going. It was a very involved investigation.
It would be a protracted investigation, yeah.
Yeah, and this guy, basically the intended victim, was his wife's aunt. And it was said to be they wanted an inheritance. I think the woman, Marianne Schur, had written into her will, a few of her nieces, but one was a Scientologist and she didn't want the money going to the church. And so this guy thought, my wife might be in with a chance. And yeah, it turns out he was a really bad man.
Was his wife on the will, as it turned out?
No, she wasn't.
Oh,
so
God.
yeah, so it was kind of like, but I don't think from all my research, it was quite widely reported at the time. She wasn't aware of what he'd done. The auntie had come to Australia the year before and spent time with them, and but she was not aware of her husband's murderous intent. And yeah, it turned out, so he was convicted of a particular charge that hadn't been actually used since.
It's probably something from the 18th century.
Yeah, it was something from 100 years ago, and it had never actually been used. It was a very strange thing. And because it was across two countries, it was very, very odd.
So was he charged in Australia?
Yeah. The trial happened in Australia, and interestingly, right at the last minute, he pled.
Yeah.
But people in Germany were at the airport literally waiting to board the plane to come out and give evidence. But this man, he was from the former Czechoslovakia and had moved to South Africa, where he actually had murdered his wife's lover and burnt the body. Not a great guy.
No.
Found his ex-wife in bed with a guy and just went off and murdered him. But he applied to go to Australia, didn't put any of this down, came in about, the late 70s. Oops, forgot to put that down on the form.
See, 1984.
And he was actually up on charges of fraud when he left South Africa because he'd taken money for a cruise from people. There was no cruise. Okay. So he was a bad bastard.
Yeah.
So I found out when he was released, he served, a few years, a decent whack, I guess. But yeah, I was trying to find out if he'd been deported because it's likely he was.
Oh, I would imagine so.
Yeah. So that was bizarre. But then I also weaved into that chapter, there was another case of a woman trying to poison her cousin or a sister in Melbourne with chocolates, but the rat, it was like rat poison. It was so old. It was useless, basically.
There's a long history of poisonings in Australia, mass poisonings. There's, I think, a very famous case from the late 19th century of a boarding home owner who was poisoning her residents at a fairly substantial rate. This made me think too, you might remember it was during Morrison's time, of course. So I'm going to say about 2016, 2017, the pins in the strawberries.
Yes. They never found out who did it, did they?
No, there was a fellow charged, but the charges were ultimately dropped. And so that remains largely unresolved. We did have Scott Morrison chipping up, and we actually created federal law around it, with some strong penalties for people who did these sorts of things, put in pins and so forth. Food contamination sort of things are a bit of a thing. There was, I did watch the documentary a while back. So you and I are just hopeless about this sort of stuff. But there was the Tylenol.
Yes, the Tylenol
tamperings that led to the deaths of a number of people. Yeah, it led to the deaths of a number of people. And it was terrifying for people who were taking, sort of low level painkiller and so forth. And we're sort of rolling the dice.
And that's still unsolved?
It is largely unsolved, yeah. So
that made changes to the way medications are packaged because of that. I believe that, the tamper-proof lids, that was one of the reasons that came into be.
That was all due to the Tylenol tampering case, which led to the deaths of a number of people in the United States. What are the other cases? I mean, you're basically, you arranged, I guess there were probably 10, 12 cases in the new book.
Yeah.
What's another one that you'd like our listeners to think about?
Yeah. Well, one that I found, it was from 1950, and it was about the disappearance of a woman from Frankston in, down the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. And at the time, it was one of the biggest missing persons investigations. I'd never heard of it. And it was a woman called Caroline Scully. And she had allegedly, according to her husband, just sort of taken off and gone on the Spirit, which was the train that went from Melbourne to, I believe, Wodonga, and then
would
it
change
would go on
to
to
go to
Sydney.
Sydney. Yeah.
But it was really fascinating because what happened with that is, she wasn't reported missing immediately. Her husband was the last person to see her.
This just sounds like a lot of disappeared, murder, or women murdered by their husbands sort of cases.
Yeah, and it was big. And what I found fascinating was there, and the way it's reported. So newspapers like The Truth back in the day, which I love reading The Truth.
The Truth,
they
fantastic.
Did heaps of crime, but her husband Edward Scully, they had 4 adult children. Some of them lived quite close by, quite a close family. Caroline, they lived in a house in a place called Ritchie Street, which now there's a shopping centre on that, but it was right in the guts of Frankston, right in the middle. And she actually worked part-time as a sort of housekeeper for a couple, the Jewsons, and he was one of the biggest bookies at the time. Like, they lived in a really big house, and, she was meant to show up for work and didn't. But, Edward
She worked for an
been,
SB bookmaker.
Yeah, they were really rich. I think Len and Elmer Jewson were the couple's names, so he was one of the biggest bookies at the time. But she worked for them a couple of days a week, sort of just doing house cleaning and stuff.
Right.
But her husband had been in the Navy for a long time. They were originally from the UK, moved to Australia, and he'd left the Navy. He was in his early 50s, but they'd kind of been separated for a while. And this was coming out of World War II as well.
Still living in the same home, but separated.
Yeah, but he was sort of off, and he was actually in a relationship with another woman, a younger woman he'd met when he was working as a cook. He was a cook in the Navy, and he'd work at this big sort of camp place. And, was with this much younger woman. But
would that be up in the old ports of beyond Portsea?
Yes,
there was
it's
a naval
around,
base there.
It was a camp that was then, it used to be like what they call a migrant camp, and then it became a holiday camp, and then the land was sold, and the government sold the land or they bought it back. I can't remember. I can't remember what I wrote.
I think there's a battle for it to become a national park, and maybe it has, but I think it's still a state-known park. I actually looked into this in relation to another matter. But
it was a massive bit of land. And so, look, there was some sort of attempt for them to reconcile, but, you're only going by newspaper reports and also what people were told at the time, People didn't question things, I think, as much as they do now, but they ended up selling the house and his story, because the thing is, you've only got his story. She's dead. She's dead. She's never been found. Her body's never been found, but to reunite, but it was thought to be really a ruse to get her to sell the house. He'd have some money and he start this life with this new woman. And so his kids were like, that's weird. Why would mum go off? One of the daughters was about to have a baby. They're very close. And the heat was on this Edward Scully for a while. Big investigation. I mean, detectives went interstate. They spoke to heaps of people. They spoke to, the bookie that she worked for, friends, colleagues, the real estate agent. It was just unusual. They're like, why would she do this? And he had to be almost cajoled, forced to go and report her missing by the kids. It was like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after she'd gone. So, the cops are digging up the garage. They're like, they're pretty sure she's dead.
Even in 1950, for an experienced homicide investigator, they got to look at these circumstances and say, he is prime suspect. He is our suspect number one.
He's primo. And he ended up getting arrested in Queensland, where he was up with his girlfriend, Jean, and they were posing as man and wife, essentially. I think at one stage they were working down in the Yarra Valley in Narberthong at the Black Stump Hotel, and so there's all this intrigue, and he got brought back he was questioned, and they're really pushing him. They're like, yeah, mate, come on. You've done this. And the story goes that he eventually said what happened to his son, that, you know, she'd like they were having a fight in the kitchen and she suddenly fainted and hit her head on the stove, and he checked and she was dead. Oh boy, what happens? And okay, look, I think probably he got away with murder, and I know my publisher said, "Are you allowed to say that?" I said, "Yeah."
Well,
he's dead. Everyone's dead. Like,
yeah,
dead. It was actually really chilling because, again, I use that word because when you're reading about it and like the daughter's going through, one of the daughters is in the house and saying, well, Mum's crochet blankets here. She never travels without that. You know, things like that. They know their parent. They're like, that's weird. You know, she hadn't collected her half of the money for the house sale. Okay, well, what's going on here? You know, and the husband's like, well, I think maybe she went to New South Wales, or she could be in Tasmania, or it just was weird. He was running them ragged. And yeah, but what happened was he said that she died, and he panicked, and he basically took her body out to sea and dumped it. And it was to be the first case in Victoria to be tried for murder without a body, but it did not end up proceeding with that charge. He was charged with like disposing of a body, interfering with, you know,
with a corpse.
Yeah, like, and the ability for a coroner to do a, investigation. And, you know, his lawyer's like, well, he was in the Navy for a long time. He's seen people buried at sea. This isn't unusual.
Man. He's got away with murder, basically, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I did get in contact with a relative of like one of the children of the children, you know, and she did comment and said, you know, Auntie Bet, that was one of the adult children, was like, it just never made sense to them that their mum would leave. And they're the kind of, I just found that intriguing, really.
Well, it resonates with Teacher's Pet, doesn't it? You know, the podcast that basically lit up the world around.
It was a very good podcast.
Yeah. And again, this unexplained, almost inexplicable case of a woman who just disappears, who leaves the family home, who was said to have left the family home and never seen again.
Yeah. And I understand, look, people are complicated. You know, sometimes people do things that are out of character, but there are just things, and this, I think this is okay to say, you know, that was something that I think was in people's minds with the court case of Erin Patterson. You know, I guess we all like to think how we would act in a certain way, but sometimes there's just things where you're like, nah.
Yeah. And
I don't know. That's my thought.
Well, no, she's been convicted now. We can certainly say those things. The other thing to mention about that particular case all the way back in 1950, as we move forward, abortion was criminalised in Victoria until actually very recently. And that meant it was a crime to perform an abortion
and to procure
Victoria.
one.
And to procure one. And that was left with the homicide squad in Victoria to investigate. And that led to an extraordinary outburst of corruption that was ultimately identified in the Kay inquiry. In 1970, it was a parliamentary inquiry. And it got to the point where the head of homicide was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in jail for his role in it. There was another senior police officer, and then the bag man, I think, who was a detective senior constable. So what was happening was that you had obstetricians and gynecologists who were actually paying protection money to Victoria Police so they wouldn't be investigated. And that went all the way down to, because of these dreadful laws, we had backyard abortions that often led to horrible deaths of women from septicemia and other ways. It was just a dreadful way to die. And these people performing these illegal abortions would have to pay police.
Yeah, they'd get their surgeries raided and but what I found interesting was, it's always interesting when you see the names of the homicide investigators in cases. And one little thing is, like, back in the older days, they would always use initials for cops' names. So I'm trying to Google what the hell's their name, but you know, the homicide detectives in 1950 who were investigating this case, well, one of them ended up appearing before that inquiry. He wasn't convicted, but he was
wasn't.
a larger-than-life character. Bluey Adam was his name. But
Frank Bluey Adams,
yeah, it was like I thought, and I thought I just needed, well, for me, but also readers, I thought, I'll add in, like, it's just an interesting thing to note that I'm not saying that they didn't investigate properly or anything like that, but, when you read about a lot of crimes, historic crimes, and you know this probably better than anyone, there is that layer of police corruption that often kind of is over a lot of investigations.
And here it's a clear case of the law creating those preconditions.
Yeah.
So, we do hear occasionally from advocacy groups saying that abortion should be recriminalised. Well, we already know how badly that ends.
Yeah, how's that going to go?
And the Kay inquiry and its findings is a pretty good example of what goes on when you have abortion criminalised. Frank Bluey Adams,
yes, he was a man about town, apparently.
He was a man about town, and I'm wondering if I've got him confused with a Melbourne footballer from the halcyon days of Melbourne footy club in the 50s and 60s.
Because some cops were footy players, weren't they?
Yeah, a lot of them were. Yeah,
they played the VFL.
I'm not sure if that's him or not. Bluey, it's the old, if you got red hair, you were a Bluey,
You're
right?
a Bluey. It's a very strange, it's hard to, my husband's from the UK and just explaining that to him, he's like, what? Yep. Yeah. If you got red hair, you're Bluey.
You're Bluey. That's it. Never the twain shall meet. So the true crime genre, we're both a part of it. When we look at the cases of Erin Patterson, there are other cases around the United States that we talked about a bit yesterday. Is true crime doing more harm than good?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because historically, true crime, people have always been interested in true crime. Like back before, in the days of Charles Dickens, people would go to court cases. They'd go to public hangings. Like, it's always been a fascination, and luridly reported. But I think there is a concern, certainly when anyone's commenting and the ease of being able to comment on things on social media. I mean, it's not just like giving your opinion over a cup of coffee or writing a letter to the editor, like back in the day. There's rules around stuff. And we, as journalists, you learn that. You learn about defamation, about subjudice, about contempt of court, and it's seared into your mind every year when you do your media refresher training, law refresher training. But yeah, look, I think being interested in something's fine. There's people who do some really good, sleuthing, like deep diving kind of, but it's what do you do with that? Like there's very passionate advocates for missing people, and I respect that, but I guess it's the ease at which people just kind of try and make something out of something.
That probably don't understand what a proper criminal investigation looks like, that do not understand the sorts of evidence that can be presented to a jury, and these amateur sleuths. We were talking yesterday about the University of Idaho murders. 4 young students there were killed in their sort of university home, off-campus university home, savagely stabbed, all 4 of them, and they were very, very young. And while this police investigation was underway, and it was a long and protracted investigation, there was a sort of vacuum of information. There was a lot of frustration expressed in this town, Moscow, Idaho, that the police weren't providing enough information to the media. So in this vacuum, we had all these amateur internet sleuths carrying on, and they came up, some of them at least came up with some terrible conclusions, including that the family members of the deceased, of the victims, were involved in the murders,
Yeah, and that's traumatic. That's horrible stuff.
And it was just awful. Now, all of that's gone by the wayside. These were murders committed in 2022. The offender, or the man accused just last week, pleaded guilty to the 4 murders. He pleaded guilty to 1 count burglary, 4 counts murder, and he pled in order to avoid the death penalty. So that
The
was
firing
Brian,
squad, isn't it?
Brian Koberger. Yeah, I think they do in Idaho use a firing squad. And in fact, it's another topic for another time because they can't use these largely Swiss manufactured drugs. The Swiss won't allow them to be used in this way. So they are now becoming, the death by lethal injection is now falling by the wayside in the United States throughout various jurisdictions. I think it's important to know that I think nearly 30 states don't have the death penalty. But those that do are now coming up with more and more elaborate ways of doing that. So this guy's pleaded guilty to, and that supports all of the police investigative stuff. But unfortunately, while there was a vacuum of information, people were drawing their own conclusions. There are Reddit pages, there are podcasts, there are all sorts of things.
My kids saw a lot of stuff on TikTok and Instagram about
TikTok, and it was another thing.
Crime, people just giving their crime opinions on the TikTok.
And there is this kind of sense like we know better, and that's, you are dealing with, well, I think even for this small town police department, it was a difficult investigation. This is northern Idaho. And there was a serial killer that they put away there about 10 years ago. But generally speaking, this sort of crime just doesn't occur.
No.
So it always seems to be the most salacious type events that draw this attention from what we might call the amateur true crime brigade.
Yeah. I think because of the nature of the news cycle now, and you're not just writing a story and it gets published the next day. There is I know there is pressure on reporters to be doing updates online. You've got to have eyeballs on your story.
Yep.
You're judged in a way by the metrics of your story. So it's like, when I worked on the local newspapers and we were doing online stuff, but you could still do your story about like Betty who turned 100 down at the local aged care, or, the local group's doing this, and that is very important community stuff. I think community newspapers are incredibly important, but there's this absolute hunger for constant news updates. But there's also a process
there's also a process involved. So you're filing with an editor, and your editor will fact check, or particularly in a smaller operation, but in a larger newspaper there'll be a number of people. There'll be sub editors, although they're declining by the day.
There used to be. I learned a lot from sub editors. It's sad,
and I still do. They'll pick up the thing that you really didn't think of. So there is a process. It's an editorial process that is designed to catch and remove some of the reporter's potential mistakes. It might be defamatory imputations. It might be that you've got a fact wrong. It might be that sort of thing. So there's a process there. But on social media, that process doesn't exist.
No. And there's not the understanding of the limitations of, also about being correct. That being factual, you want to be, when you're a journo, right, you want to be first, but you got to be right,
Yeah, that's right.
But now it's like there's a hunger for information, and I understand that, we're not going to know everything. Just because you're not hearing something doesn't mean police aren't doing stuff. That's the thing. But, but transparency is important, but there is just stuff that you can't share. And I think we demand to know, because we have so much at our fingertips. You just bloody Google. I remember having to go back in the day, if you needed to do a project, you had to go to the library, get the encyclopedia, photocopy it. It was not an easy process to get information.
No. And now there's a sort of arrogance around that too by some members of this, as I say, this sort of true crime. There's a terrible arrogance anyway, and it's sometimes put forward by professional true crime journalists.
Yeah.
That, we can solve an unsolved murder 40 years later. That to me is an incredibly arrogant thing to do. You might propose an investigation might propose to establish who it might have been, but I think this whole business that we can solve crimes ourselves through internet searches and what have you is kind of bogus.
Yeah. I think if you start with that intention, that's the wrong way to do it. I think you've got to start with curiosity and an interest for, well, just asking questions like, what happened? You know, this hasn't been reported on for decades. Let's go. Like the teacher's pet. I mean, I've followed a few cases where it's like, okay, well, what's going on? What's, happening? But yeah, you can't. People
Start
who
with
think,
the assumption
I'm going to
is
solve this.
I know who's
I'm going to solve
I know
it.
who's
I'm
done
going to
this,
make
or
my
I
name.
think I can solve it.
Yeah, this is going to be my career, because I guess maybe more so in North America, but there's that fame element to it where you want to.
Well, it's clicks and follows, right?
Yeah,
That's the currency. And so it does lead to really, really bad outcomes. I've often said, if Zuckerberg or one of these others said to us, 30 years ago, listen, I'm going to bring this thing in that's going to allow you to link up and have conversations with people you would never have had conversations with. But it also means that we're going to seize your data and we're going to create all sorts of unintended social consequences. You'd look at it and go, I don't know about this, Mark. I think we might need to regulate the hell out of this stuff, but it just didn't work that way.
No.
So now we have this huge problem, and it's a problem that extends well beyond the true crime.
Yeah, I do.
True crime
Sometimes
issue.
I think a lot about this stuff and I kind of get a bit of existential crisis like AI. I'm just sick of friggin' seeing AI everywhere. I'm like, I don't want to use your AI, piss off kind of thing. I just think I can't deal with it. Or people on X just going, hey, Grok, what does this mean? Or, Grok's been in the news lately. I'm like, can't we think for ourselves, please?
Well, Wikipedia, which is, I think now, it might be 30 years old now. AI is going to have so many impacts across all of our lives, but it's kind of Wikipedia is dying because of AI.
It's a shame.
Which uses AI. I mean, we found out that Zuckerberg, mentioning him again, he pulled in, you can actually type in your own title and see if he's actually seized that book, no intellectual property, or just overran that and used it as the basis. They prefer books rather than social media entries and even articles in newspapers. They prefer books to develop this sort of bank of knowledge that AI can call on. So, Unholy Trinity got nabbed.
I think I don't know if mine had. I checked a while ago, but I will check. But it really pisses me off because you know what it's like writing a book. You don't look. I'm never going to get rich from writing books. Maybe something crazy.
Well, you know how many hours it took for a start, and for someone just to heave, basically pull the intellectual property apart and use it for their own financial benefit. This is a writer's problem, listeners. This was us having a bit of a whinge. But it is a terrible problem. Thing. And obviously Facebook senior executives, including Zuckerberg, just decided it's just going to be easy just to steal it, and then people will come and we will have legal claims made against us later. But that's okay. We'll deal with that. Rather than contacting all of the publishers, authors, etc., if the book was out of print and seeking their approval, we're just going to go and pinch it. And that's what happened.
Adds to the lack of respect for the process. Like for me, obviously the end product is good, but it's almost the process for me is the joy and the pain.
Yeah.
Because once I've done something, I'm kind of like, yeah, I've done it. That's cool. What's next? I don't sit and kind of glaze over it. I just do it. But for me, it's the process, and I get a lot of satisfaction from, learning and doing. And I just feel like everything's a shortcut. Why do you need something to summarize a book in a paragraph because you want to read 50 books in a day? The whole reason is reading the book. I don't know. It just drives me
shareholder
wild.
value, I think, is the answer to that. And that's a driving force behind a lot of sort of corporate greed. Tell me, what are your favorite true crime podcasts?
Well, I've been listening to podcasts for a very, very, very long time. And I do have some that I love it, I really like podcasts, true crime ones that are done by the BBC. I really liked, there was a couple that the Australian did. There was one about My Sister's Secrets. I'm trying to think of the name.
That's okay.
Or Shadow of a Doubt. That was a really good one. I really liked that. The BBC, do some great ones. There's one, and I can't say why it's my favourite, but there was one done by BBC Scotland about quite an old unsolved case in Scotland, and it was called the Doorstep Murder. And this guy just got shot on his doorstep. And I thought that was, that's quite old now, that one. But I really like Trace, the ABC Trace, Rachel Brown.
Rachel Brown, yeah. Rachel did some fantastic work that was a bit related to some of the things I was looking at. So I got to know particularly around the Thornbury bookshop.
Yeah, Maria James, right.
And that was just a botched police effort. It's very likely the offender there was a priest.
Yeah, scary.
Father Bongiorno.
Yeah.
There's a long list of Bongiornos who were priests, including the political journalist Paul Bongiorno. He was a priest in Warrnambool
for a little while, hey?
Yes, and I think this is a cousin, but unfortunately, police lost the physical evidence, and including material that might have shown DNA. The old homicide detective, he investigated this matter. He was actually calling on the relatives of Bongiorno, the priest, John Bongiorno, I think it was, to provide DNA samples, and he eventually got them, and it showed negative. And that was because all of the material from the crime scene had been perverted, had been mixed up with other cases.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Anyway, it was great work on her behalf to get that, because police had to come forward, head bowed, and said, look, this is a mistake. It wasn't corruption, because the unholy trinity stuff shows you that police were protecting priests.
100%.
Did they protect this priest? We don't know.
It's all that.
We don't know.
Yeah, because there is incompetence. There's incompetence, which is shit as well. But
if it comes to a question of incompetence or corruption, 90%. 9 out of 10, it's ineptitude. Right?
Yeah, that's right. It's just people not doing what they're meant to do. Another podcast that I really thought was great, and it was actually scary as hell. It was the LA Times did a podcast called The Man in the Window. It was about the Golden State Killer, the cop who was there.
Yeah,
but
I know
oh my God, it was so well done. And I know there was the book and all that. But this podcast was, because, it was audio, and they were playing like the tapes of the messages this man left. It was just scary as hell. But it was excellent. But I like podcasts like that. And for my own personal podcasting, I was, involved with Australian true crime for many years, and I recently did a series with Vicky Petratus called The Unthinkable. Case File Presents put that out for us. But what was different about that is we'd do the interviews, and then we'd be scripting. And that really challenged me. I found that quite hard, but it was intense, really satisfying. Yeah.
But for a study like that, this is what we're talking about before, some of the shortcomings of true crime. If you haven't got your facts there in front of you while you're reading from a scripted piece, and this is what we do with conditional release program for the most part, we script because we don't want to get these things wrong. We still manage to get a few things wrong, but if you've just got big gaps and you're trying to fill them with nonsense, and that's what happens with a lot of just, the sort of amateur investigators. If they've got a gap in their knowledge, they'll fill it with nonsense.
Yeah, and I don't like the podcasts where they spend 15 minutes just talking about nothing, laughing, crap, and I'm like, get to the story. Let's get here. I want to just the facts, ma'am.
The old Joe Rogan just patter for 3 hours. Who's got that sort of time in their lives? Yeah, look, we just want to give your book a bit of a pump before we go. It's called Murder in the Suburbs, and it would be available at all good books are kept.
All good bookstores.
But if people want to buy it online, ebook or the print version.
Yep.
And where would they do that?
Well, there's plenty of places they can go to. The bigger places like QBD, Dimmicks. It's going to be in Big W. Readings. It's available as we record this. It's not out quite yet. But yeah, you ask your bookstore to get it in.
Well, one thing that annoys booksellers no end is if you actually say, the book the book is not yet out because they'll have people, knocking on their doors and saying, well, the book's out. Why haven't you got it?
30th of July.
30th of July.
It is definitely available for pre-order. But, yeah, it will be on shelves around that time of some of possibly the bigger places. But you'll support your local bookstore and you can, ask them to get it in. And also your library. You can actually request your library orders books that you want. So there you go.
This is the difficulties publishers have. Yes, of course. So you pre-order by all means, folks, but the book won't be out on shelves until the 30th. You might find a few copies out there. But this is one of the problems for publishing and bookselling in particular, that the big chains, the big W's and the Kmarts and all that sort of stuff, because of their retail punching power, they are able to order in. They'll order, let's say each of their branches will order in 30 copies of your book. When that branch runs out of that book, they will never reorder because they have when they order these big things in chunks, they get sale or return, they get big discounts. And so we found this with Unholy Trinity, which is the biggest selling book in Mildura. So people were going into the Mildura big, and their stock of 150 had run out. So they were just telling people, no, the book's no longer available.
And there's some lovely bookstores.
And I had to deal with poor old Dennis was getting really worried because he didn't understand these things. And yeah, big retail can sort of push publishers around a bit. And that's one of the, it's one of the problems.
And I mean, I know bookshops and that they get the notifications of books coming out. I go to one of my local bookstores and I asked for them to order books in. I want to support my local.
It's a good thing.
There's a lovely bookstore. I think I can't remember which chain is in Mildura though. There's an independent bookstore there.
There was a Collins that just kept pumping their book out. But yeah, anyone who went to Big W thinking they could save $3 or $4 would be told, no, the book's no longer available. And then they go and knock on Dennis's door and say, what the bloody hell's going on? Poor old Dennis goes, what's happened? What's happened?
And then you've got to have your own boxes in the garage so you can flog them
in the
yourself.
end, I think he did knock a few out of the boot of his car. God love him. Look, it's been lovely to have you on and discuss these things, not just the true crime genre and some of its shortcomings. Also talk about your book, but also talk about the process as a writer, what you have to go through. And I know that there are a lot of people out there saying, look, I'd love to be able to write a book. Or there are those who are halfway through and not quite sure how to proceed. But I think we've at least dealt with some of that today.
That's it. And massive respect to people who write books. It's like a labour of love and insanity most of the time.
If you divided your hours in writing by, let's say, the advance you receive from your publisher, you'd start taking piecework in the garage, wouldn't you? Whipping up a few $2 t-shirts.
That's it. It's
you'd
not
be better paid.
You're probably like earning 1 cent an hour or something.
It's sort of like that. So these are the many complaints and whinges and whines of writers. We stoically suffer in silence for most of the time, but we've been very fortunate on the Conditional Release program to have Emily Webb come along and discuss those issues with us. Thanks so much, Emily.
Thank you.
All the best with the book.
Oh, I'm a big fan of the podcast, so it's a real thrill for me. Thank you.
Good on you. Thanks a lot. See you later. Thanks, folks.
I don't think I ever want to talk to any of those people.
Fuck